Hey Run Once members, and welcome to another video in the PLO streets. First, very playable hand on the bottom left, King, Jack, Jack 8 double suited. We face a free bet. I think we have a very standard call for 100 big blinds. That's what we do. And we get to a flop of 9-6-4 single suited. So we have a weak overpair to the board with a jack high flush draw, no straight draws, some backdoor straight draw possibilities, no backdoor flush draw, and we face a pot size bet. So some players or also some students of mine, they have the tendency to immediately jump into the solver and see if the proof is a plate to either call, fold, or get it in here. But before you do that, I think it's important to also understand how the free bet ranges are constructed in this spot. So if we think we have a solid preflop foundation and we are kind of applying a GTO opening range from early position, then that's something where we will have like a pretty good overlap with the solver outputs. But if we think about small blind strategy, then what we will usually see, particularly in these spots, small blind versus early position, is that players are on a much more value-heavy side of their free bet range, and have a lot of hands that the solver is free betting not in their range. So some weaker kind of double pair hands, some weaker rundowns, some ace high weak rundowns, double suited. A lot of players, they don't show up with these kind of hands and rather call a lot or just fold. And yeah, that makes basically our opponent's range much more weighted towards strong overpairs, strong Broadway rundowns, strong medium double suited rundowns. And yeah, let's first see what kind of action Hero takes in the spot. He took his time, which is good, and decided for the call. I personally think that I would just muck my hand straight away on the flop. I think against a half pot size bet, we have a pretty easy call. Against the full pot size bet, I think we just also run into a lot of spots where we have reverse implies. And our showdown value is actually pretty weak with the pocket jacks. So if we were, on the contrary, would have like King, King, Jack 8, I think it would make it much closer because small blind might still show up with some ace, queen, queen combinations where our showdown value matters a lot with the pocket kings. Or if we would have additional form of equity in form of a pair, or like by pair, I mean pair on the board. So something like King, Jack, Jack 4 double suited in this instance, where we have some additional trips and two pair outs, or a straight draw. If we would have had King 10, 10, 8 double suited, I think would also make it much closer. So for this purpose, we can quickly dive into some solutions and see what the output is here. So 100 big blinds, free bet pot, small blind versus under the gun, suited, and we look at a board of 9-6-4. Yeah, that's perfect. And out of position, as we can see, has some half potting and some potting strategies. I think population is just more on the potting side of things, either checking or potting at these stakes. And we have some calls, we have some jams, and a bunch of folds, which makes a lot of sense. So if we start with our particular hands, as we had, then we can already see that even with the front door flush draw and the back door flush draw, there's some folding and some get it in. So I would assume that the split is made by, if we have the king high flush draw, then we continue. And if we have the jack high flush draw, then we fold. And that's exactly the case. So what does that tell us? In the introduction of this hand, I mentioned that small blinds will probably be free betting a tighter range than GTO does. So the implication that we'll have here is that our call will probably be worse than it is in solver land here in Vision. So, which makes me think that this becomes, it's already a fold in GTO with a backdoor flush draw. So our hand, basically a front door flush draw with the jack high suit, will probably be a very clear fold already. And if we start now playing around with this hand, so if we, for example, go over to King Jack 8, then we can see that we basically always stack off with the front door flush draw, just because we have better showdown value, we have a stronger flush draw with the king high suit, and yeah, it makes us like much better perform equity wise against our opponent's overall range. So we can have King 10 8, for example, as well, which makes it an even clearer stack off scenario. But yeah, with just the pocket jacks and the weak flush draw and no backdoor flush draw, I think we have a very clear fold on the flop. So definitely a spot where Hero did continue to light without any reads on small blind. Yeah, something that already strikes me here is also that our opponent does not really have any color codings or nodes except on the right table on this one player. So especially for Russian cash tables, I think that's something you should definitely utilize, because often we every hand we get dealt with 5 random players, and the tendency of these players makes a huge impact on our pre-flop ranges. So if we have very tight players behind us, we can start opening wider. If we have very loose players who are just very calling station type of player, or who free bet a lot, then we have to start tightening up with our range. And by having a good color coding system in place, we can basically make decisions much quicker and avoid making huge mistakes, instead of, for example, opening a hand which might be like slightly plus EV GTO open, but because of the players behind, it will be a very losing open. So definitely something that Hero should pretty much start implementing. So here decided to continue on the left side, SPR 1 on the turn, and we spike some equity with the queen, but it's also not a great card because now some of our opponents, let's say Ace Queen Jack 10, Ace King Queen X combos with a flush draw that he might play exactly the same way on the flop, have now strong showdown value, or stronger showdown value than our pocket jacks. And I don't think we have the required equity to stack off here. So I would just fold on the turn as well. I think it would be, once again, a somewhat big mistake to stack off here at 1 SPR with like around 30% required equity. Yeah, so let's see what Hero did. Hero took, again, his time and decided to fold. Yeah, first hand already very interesting, and I think it's very educative for Hero, who sent me this footage. Clear folds left and right. Somewhat loose open on the right-hand side, but I don't mind it. The blinds look like they are regulars with their VPIP. They're fully stacked. So population tendency in these spots is that blinds usually don't free bet as aggressively as the solver does, which already allows us to play single raise pots in position with high SPR. And secondly, when we look at the frequencies at which big blind and small blind fold in the whole pool, as a part of population analysis, then players are mostly overfolding in small blind and in big blind. So what does it mean? Both reasons really allow us to open wider on the button, since we take it down more often, and also we don't get denied our equity pre-flop when facing free bets. So yeah, I don't mind this somewhat wider open. If we, for example, quickly check in a pre-flop solution, King 9 6 6, I would assume it's a fold with the trip suits. Even single suited, it's a marginal open. But once we have the trip suit, it starts to become somewhat decently minus EV. But yeah, as already mentioned, I think it's a fine play by Hero. Next playable hand on the left side, Jack 10, 9, 9 single suited will be a clear cold call versus open and a clear open ourselves. Love to see it. And we face a squeeze from the small blinds. Yeah, 17 VPIP so far. I'm not sure on which sample. Always important to check as well, to not make too quick conclusions or assumptions about our opponents on small samples. And the original open raiser folds, I think this hand being perfectly connected, the Jack 10 9 9, I don't think we will fold here for 100 big blinds. It flops pretty smooth in free bet pots. Yeah, so I think proceeding with a call here makes perfect sense. We flop the absolute nuts. Small blind checks, which makes me think that he has a lot of give ups there, because population, they don't really have a lot of traps in these spots. They just see value in the hand and they automatically bet, which I do think is a mistake, but often enough in position is also not really punishing these tight tendencies when free bettors check. So it's kind of something you get away with, but once you move to higher stakes, I do think that it's something that's getting punished for sure when you just check folding too much in free bet pots. So if we think about potential exploits, I do think that we can check back here some pocket 9 combinations against heroes where we're pretty sure that we face a check fold, but I think our hand not having a straight draw, not blocking a heart is a perfectly fine bet. So if we would have something like 9987 with a single heart, 10998, 6677, 6688 with a heart, I think check behind could be a fine play to sometimes slow play. But yeah, for the most part, I think most sets and two pairs we should certainly bet in this spot. Hero opts for half pots, and we face the quick fold. King Jack 9-8 triple suited, I do think is a somewhat loose open at this rake structure. Looking at the players behind, there's no high VPIP players, so we can expect to generate a lot of fold equity when opening. Yeah, once we get free bet, I think being somewhat connected and more importantly, not having an ace in our hand, this hand is a fine continue for 100 big blinds. I'm not really too thrilled about playing post flop with this triple suited hand, but I think it's still fine after we open. I would have just like folded this hand pre-flop, I think. And what I said in the beginning of this video, like rush tables versus regular tables. If we look now left and right, we have on the right-hand side a 24, 23, 16, 21, and 0 VPIP players. So it looks like they're all somewhat tight passive, tight players, or regulars who just play very ABC style. So it's a kind of table I would just never ever join if I would scan through the lobby and check the regular tables. And same on the left-hand side, like all players VPIB ranges between 15 and 25%. So that's the huge disadvantage of playing rush tables, that you often get dealt in tables where the rest of the table is just like rakeback grinders or regulars, and there's not a lot of win rate you can generate, I think, as compared to regular tables where you can pick your spots and basically guarantee that every hand you play at a table you're involved with one or two or even more weaker players. So on the right hand side, as already mentioned, I think fine continue. On the flop, with some backdoor straight draw opportunities, no diamond blocker. I think checking back, having a bit of short-term value should be the standard. Getting to the turn, having no straight blockers, no suit blocker, I would say just checking it down and potentially sometimes being good at showdown is fine. And facing river bets. I like the fact that Hero is not like snap folding here and spending his time on all his options. I think that's also something that a rush environment or Zoom, like whatever the fast forward formats are called on the different poker sites, is really pushing you to do, is to just act fast and play fast and move from one hand to another and kind of be lazy in thinking. So I like that Hero takes his time here and considers all his options. So he thinks about raising. Let's see what he ends up doing. He folds, and I like that. I like the fold. I don't think his hand is a good bluffing candidate on the river to pretty much rep boats only. Because if we think about our flop and turn action, we would pretty much bet all our two pairs and sets on the flop. And once we get to the turn, there are probably some two pairs that we check back, but these are mostly not having a 9 because these we would bet on the flop. So we're talking about 3-4, 4-5, 5-3. Potentially was like weak 5-3. We might check back on a flop. So once we get to the river, I think the 9 is not really a good blocker in that sense because it doesn't really help us to rep full houses that we can have. So I would much rather, if I would ever consider bluffing in the spot, pick hands that have either a 5 or 3 in it instead of a 9, because that kind of line makes more sense with regards to the hands that we can rep getting to the river. All right, so going a bit back on the left-hand side, we defended, looks like freeway with the Jack 10 8-4 double suited. I think it's close, but freeway, it's fine, being a bit disconnected. So on the flop, I think our hand is not a great leading hand. We're kind of in a very merged spectrum of our value range slash mate hand range. So betting here and get raised would be pretty disastrous. And I think we have a very high interest in just realizing our equity. Face a half pot bet. I think with two backdoor flush draws, there's only one way to play this hand, and that is to call, which Hero opts for. On the turn, we spike some more equity. We're still behind against mate straights and better two pairs and sets. So I guess once again, no reason to lead, no reason to check raise. We're just interested to realize our equity. So I think checking to see the river and to check call versus a bet should be the play, and pretty much call all bet sizes, also pot. Just too much equity in this case with a gut shot to the nuts with a flush draw and two pair outs, full house outs. I mean, once again, Hero considers all his options. I've check jamming here could be something that in GTO that might be fine as a play, but I just don't think that the fold equity that we generate here is as high as it is in GTO, because the in-position player will just have a hard time to show up with a lot of bet folds. So if we never bet fold, if our opponent never bet folds, then there is absolutely no reason to pull the trigger here and check jam, since we basically don't have fold equity and only get called by better hands. Yeah, and therefore I think just check calling should be fine. And on the river, we river a nice card for us, which is most of the time the best hand. So we're ahead here against sets and straights, which I think Hero is wrapping a lot on the turn, particularly straights. So the question here becomes, like, if we bet, like, what kind of size do we want to bet? we have the 8 of spades and the 10 of spades, so we block some flushes that our opponent can have with like 8x or 10x, which is not too great. So let's say if we would have Jack 10 instead, I think then our hero will have some more flushes that we dominate or could potentially dominate. We also have a 10, which reduces some amount of nut straights our opponent could have. I think going here for 1/3 or half pot should be good, trying to put our opponent in a tough spot to call with some straights and yeah, call with some straights and maybe some weaker flushes. So yeah, I think going for 1/3 or half pot here should be the play. And let's see. He goes for a third. I like it. Puts our opponent even in tougher spots, makes it harder to fold straights, which there are plenty out there. And gets the emoticon back. Hero is deep in the tank. Let's skip a bit forwards. Times down and shows up with 10-9-6-6. So flop the set with a gut shot, turned the nut straight, and rivered the flush. Yeah, surprised to see the tank for so long. I guess yeah, a spot that is just not bluffed often enough in these games, which is why Button tanks for so long. I don't really think he considered to jam versus the block bet, just to whether he wants to call or not. Yeah, fine play by Button. I think just a bit of a nit roll in this case against 1/3.